The main point where we started was what is important: air, water, trees, the soil. What happens in urban environments when the more build-up there is, more impervious surfaces, it increases the runoff and it reduces the capacity for the ground for the water to percolate into the ground. Something Islan mentioned also is the heat island effect. Something very important to keep in mind. It comes back to more buildings, the more heat gets absorbed in the buildings, which radiate out, and vegetation can help a lot, shading the surfaces of the buildings so that they don't heat up. Because last time I had mentioned that concrete is not the way forward for everything. Of course, we can't avoid it totally, but so there's so much available. I mean, we have our homegrown poured earth and rammed earth and the compressed earth blocks. The ancient techniques of lime plaster, of lime, building with lime. But what this just shows is that the areas with the high percolation is where somehow the forests have developed mostly. So I came up with this very schematic little plan for the infrastructure and to have precast conduits in the places where we will in the near future need more infrastructure to come in. Yeah, so these are the precast conduits. It can be all very neatly laid in. And these are these humongous junction boxes. Of course, I've now learned that the infrastructure, it's too early to decide on what the infrastructure will be, but that will be decided by the experts when things are more clear. In my little sketch of the conduits, which could follow the contour of the ground and be used as cycle and pedestrian walkways. They could be above ground where it's necessary for the water to flow under, or in the ground, the water can flow over. They could be sealed. The road actually just needs to be as wide as emergency vehicles, so 3 meters, this is supposed to be 3 meters, is sufficient. And it turns out that it's also the most comfortable and the most safe if you give priority to cyclists. And then you have the different sections throughout the crown, which would be from very narrow, and then just the different experiences, but always making sure that there's sufficient shade. And just I think what makes sense is to keep the infrastructure always in the exact same position, but everything else can meander around that. The different aspects of what could all happen on this stretch of crown, which I wanted to look at in more detail. Then moving on from the solar kitchen, having that stretch in center field between the center guest house and solar kitchen could become like a pedestrian cyclist thing with lots of green. And then I wanted to look at the solar kitchen again, so I went into a little bit more detail. And the idea was, this is the edge of the line of force. So I just looked at like what would the movements be. This is the solar kitchen PTTC. Where do people come from? Where do they go? And then create shade with trees and temporary shading structures until the trees are big along the edges, where we could have eateries and whatever, and in the center keep an open space, which could be like a sort of a step well for activities. I just wanted to emphasize is to maximize the minimum and plan to allow for the future to be planned and build only for now. We don't know what wonders the future holds. Thank you.
How can I bring together the image of the galaxy, its interpretation through the master plan right-of-ways, and land that in the context and see what really remains when I do that? How exciting does it become? It's something which I always wanted to do. I always felt like, hey, how does this image, which is not realistically implementable now, today, for many, many reasons, and I think it was never wished for to be a 1:1 model to be built. It's an ideation, it's a process. So for me, I always wanted to see how does that change when it comes into contact with the many aspects of life in this area. This would be then a kind of thinkable traffic concept where we accept these roads as a given. We can't necessarily change them. They're often on Parambook, or they are so established that they are just reality. We also look at villages and how can we address the impossible situation of heavy traffic of buses and all going through the villages, so trying to create bypasses wherever possible. Here at Irumbai, where I have the temple, which could be a very beautiful spiritual arrival point at the road from Kut Road over Red Earth Riding School, coming here next to the visitor center, or extending down to the road which goes to Oro Orchard, Hope, and then into Ida and Chavadi, or coming up from here, Bomai Palayam, Jaima corner, going a little bit up on the already paved road, and then bypassing Kulapalayam village on the outer line of the master plan area. So here we see the different roads. I have, for example, Certitude, which in all our proposals will be a large transport node. It will be a switch off, it will be a filtration system as it is now already. Of course, we need to support our security systems much more, because that is, I think we have 38 different entry points into Auroville. So we need to somehow focus on protecting them. So that here, this is one major point. We keep, or maybe I should start with that one. This is for all the traffic, the 1 million visitors coming into Auroville every year. They would arrive from the west and would have an arrival point, maybe together with the line of Goodwill, using the existing facilities, and switch, get to know Auroville, and then switch into a different mode of transport, and then go into the city. I have the existing road here from Certitude through here. I have the Crown Road, which can have different experiences, and I have a large access here for the industrial zone from Kotakarai and just south of Alankupam. I can form a loop road with just the extension of existing roads over here. Maybe in another 6 years, Auroville could look in parts already like that. And to me, it's a strong image. It's something which is still recognizable as a very unique urban form, which I think is fitting with Auroville's understanding and larger purpose. And it's connected. It really respects the ground realities, trying to make the best out of a difficult situation.
So this was the first exercise which we did, which led us to an understanding of the geometry which happens at different parts of the galaxy. We feel that the edges needs to also be really emphasized, because that's a really core aspect of the crown. We see it as one building, and we see it with an architectural eye as a singular piece of built environment. And the last line is the most important for us, is this shouldn't divide the town. Yeah, and that's, I think, the key. So where we start looking at the empty spaces, the spaces between the buildings in the galaxy model, and define them and use them as catchment for watersheds.
Water is life, the point of meeting of several water streams culminate in a line of force of life.
Okay, this is just a small slide we had done last time to indicate how the development could happen, integrating the existing trees and the water catchment areas. And actually, the key is defining the edges of the building in the spirit of the edges in the crown. And we let different people build different parts of the whole crown, wherein this whole sense of authorship almost melts away in a way.
Looking at how the crown holds the forest, rather than the forest making way for the crown, the parks are holding the whole master plan. Shinrin Yoku, which a lot of people said, wow, that sounds lovely. An invitation for mindful movement through planned walkways and cycle paths, built environment that is planned as a nudge to pause and bringing in a sense of delight.
This connectivity is the most important. So this is the difference which I wanted to highlight from the previous section. The crown is from here to here. So for 8 months, when you take the sun chart and see in the hottest time where the street might be hot. But we realized while doing the model that the moment you connect the street on top at different levels, not just the lines of force, but other parts as well, this will become much easier for us to solve. We can achieve quite a bit of shade even in the hot summer for people to move through. The aspiration is it should be something we have not seen. And I think that's where we should head towards, yeah. What that means, God knows, yeah. But we should consciously avoid going where we have gone.
And one major feedback in the last round was also to take the entrance serious, the proposed entrance from the 99 master plan. And I think this is very valid to kind of, if we as Auroville want to have some proper welcoming gesture, then it should be planned. In this version, I included also the transport node, which is in the 99 plan. I think there's not much that speaks against it, actually. Our first step to solve the parking solution, maybe to get something in place like a car sharing, we could have parking houses here. I try to become to get a little bit more specific with the plazas around the crown and identifying centers where it would kind of be natural to have these plazas. Then the youth plaza, quite naturally along the crown, and maybe one cultural plaza in front of Kalabumi, establishing the heart of the cultural zone. And this maybe could be a place where you would have a little bit of nightlife in Auroville, where some cafes could also be open until 10 or something. What makes the Crown Road connect inside out? And my idea was more that if you really bring density up to the road and the road becomes the center, then it actually connects both sides. The interplay of the major plazas, finding these spaces, the three themes, the dense city, the village, the megastructure. Yeah, so you kind of see the more loose ensemble, and then with one line of force touching the crown, then starts the next theme. Visible, how it could look like with these different elements. So this would be the hexagon as the communal space, a town hall, the water tower, and then some amphitheater with some shading structure. And these typologies which have deep facades can also allow for green and go far into the street with their roofs.
We looked at the water flow, the way it is flowing. According to that, we kind of created different water catchments. These could be either reused or recharged depending on the kind of development which is there around. And the idea is to basically create some kind of soft landscaping elements around those water bodies so that they're not left alone, but they are maintained properly. Based on the feedback last time, we tried to look at the geometry and put the water along that. The kind of spaces that we've created all along, we're trying to see how we can experience the crown. Now what we're trying to do here is actually fixing 2.5 meters as infrastructure corridor, and mainly for the HT and LT line, and maybe OFC also, because we need that ring as per the electrical master plans. What you see here is basically the darker gray is vehicular, which is 4 meters, and that's not always along the crown ring. It is going in and out. This is, of course, conceptual.
So this is the 4-meter road which will go, which is already existing. And then there is a 2.5-meter infrastructure corridor that will go. And the rest of the space which is on the other side is totally like, that becomes as a space where the buildings are set in, set back, and create spaces and all those things. So here what we tried to do this is Sante. So here this is more like, So here the road comes and then the road kind of deviates so that the ambulance drop point is there near to Sante, and then there is a water body here around which the Sante campus can expand, and that kind of water is also good for healing and everything. And then there are other water bodies which are more public spaces which are there. And then here can be also more wellness related things and everything. So the thing is here, if you see, there is a courtyard like space which was also we tried to get from the galaxy. So there were nice courtyards on the which was falling on the center of the crown. So we tried to create those kind of things with the shade elements. So for example, this is the road that we said will close after 5. So when it closes, and there are several of them in different places in different forms, when we close them, that space can be taken up by something else and there can be an activity.
North is up. There is a lot of, we all know that this road has always been very sunny. So what is important is to build across and close-knit, have trees which would give shade and noise barriers, etc. So that's very important also climatically to organize those spaces, to have that stretch of road more usable and more as, like we say, street as a room.
It's concrete and green and blue and whatever, you can build it. You can build it as it is. But do we want to do that? Do we want to go beyond the map in the sense, what is it the idea? Today, Marie and Neha were talking about the parks, the 4 parks, and the values. What does it represent? What does it really represent? Can we get kind of deeper into that? And see what it reveals. For us. When we are looking at, really trying to bring that map on the territory in a way. So I believe we always meet somewhere in between. Insights, that we've collectively got, or some of them, have been shared, are kind of worth noting. And I kind of overlaid it, Marie's and Ganesh and Neha's, and then the topography, the negative of the galaxy, as a positive. They're looking at it as something that could kind of pre-exist in a way, and that doesn't necessarily come from just the form of it. I feel it can come from the, from our experiences with water, with how the slopes are working, where the trees are, all that. This Marie's diagram also is fascinating, where the crown, can obviously, we all have kind of understood that it doesn't need to be the same width. So it can change in different zones. So I kind of looked at the Dharkli area and the industrial zone. So I was looking at these areas, basically trying to draw what is there, in terms of pathways, in terms of canyons, in terms of the trees. Some resonance with the galaxy, but doesn't have to be literally that. What I'm trying to do here with the crown here is to actually have it as a kind of a porous, positive mass, which allows for that percolation. It can also, we were talking about duct that one can walk into, which can be integrated within this. Some of the cross sections we've been thinking of what this could be, and it could have a lot of character. This built landscape. It could have, gabions, could have, eventually moss growing, or things growing. One could enter the the line of force and create this very interesting urban form here. It's basically everything is on stilts, but allowing for the forest to weave in. So this is like the area in between the 2 lines of forces. This is very doable, I feel, where we have a character which we can, in a way, define, like how much areas, let's say in terms of percentages, that we allow it to be really close to the crown. So we could create sort of these zones almost, and have that character emerge.
Buildings that would integrate water systems like wastewater and rainwater, integrating windmills and kunds so that we have a constant flow of water from the lower levels of the crown to the upper levels, to the upper kunds, and that water can flow by gravity subsurface to irrigate the whole inner city area. And the inner city area can then be water-rich without drip or sprinklers.
We have detailed areas of the crown, starting from humanscape and going all the way up to solar kitchen and beyond. We also have woven this child-friendliness into our crown experience. We wanted to suggest is in order for us to slowly make the transition to having the crown unmotorized, we are suggesting to get a couple of e-shuttles. To demarcate that this is really supposedly non-motorized, we suggest to put some pots on the road with plants.
A line of water, a water channel, which we propose to run in 8 sections along the crown. It's called the Lakshman Rekha. It's a physical barrier that vehicles cannot cross. The other purpose of the Lakshman Rekha was to irrigate under the surface all the vegetation.
We have reduced the road width to 4 meters, which should be then enough for the e-shuttles and the e-cycles and everything.
We should have one place in Auroville everyone can go to any time of day or night. It's active and it's buzzing. So that's around the solar kitchen. You have an inner ring of buildings that are going like that, which are completely following Mother's principle of no money. These are co-working spaces. Anybody is wanting to start an enterprise in Auroville will have a desk and internet connection. That's the Auroville lounge. Upstairs is indoor games. And then you have a bio pool. It's a natural pool which does not use chlorine or ozone or anything. It's just root zone filtration. At Solar Kitchen Plaza, we feel that there could be a handicraft bazaar. Bazaars where village people as well as Aurovillians can put up their craft. One of the big feedbacks that came was to integrate the schools of Auroville in one campus.
So what you see in yellow is what we consider this campus area. It has all the existing schools, and it's also the area where the future schools will develop. And we have really detailed now some of the improvements. Mandapam's a flexible use building, a bit like Sauchu, with public toilets and a storeroom attached, and in this case, little study tables, a sensory footpath, science and musical exploration for kids. We have placed a playground there. We have planned a construction playground.
At the youth center Bliss Forest, we feel that there could be a canopy walk. Darkali. Can this be a place of peace, concord, and harmony? So the lines of force, can it be an impression of Mother's flowers? The flowers are actually camouflaging the tree houses and the trees from above. So you have a big flower that's tensed, it's tensile net, and that collects water into a 100-liter water tank. This is a section of Oro Dam, how it will be. We're talking of lightweight buildings, made mostly in wood, regenerative materials, regenerative design principles. And this is something eminently usable for the eco-sensitive zones, at least the lines of force, to integrate boardwalks and canopy walks on the grounds. For the infrastructure, we propose a combination of a central infrastructure corridor, which has electrical and OFC, combined with decentralized loops. First steps: animate the street life with street furniture, make transit mandapams. Can we do happy streets? The full stretch of the built crown from Mahalakshmi home to Solar Kitchen, can we convert it on Sundays for people to be free to walk and do their thing?
And then comes the park, the forepark. And I imagine the park as being the green macrostructure of the galaxy. So we are talking a lot of the line of force being the macrostructure for the city, for the building. The park, for me, are the macrostructure of the galaxy. And they create this type of pattern from the ground, from the sky, from the satellite picture, but also on the ground, a certain type of density of plant forest. And that's why there is a need of a certain width of the park that we need to respect. If you start to not to have enough width for your green infrastructure, for your green structure, macrostructure park, you will start to lose it. You will just have some plantation, but you don't have a park. And then, while the green circle here, it was more following the path. Here, for me, what is more important is the mass of forest, and the paths are around, and you meander into it. So it's a bit the same idea of here. Now we are in Makali Park. I didn't increase the size of the park. It's about 300 meters. That's where, I mean, we are in youth center. That's where trees have been cut recently, while it's a park. I mean, or it will be a park. I mean, that's the idea. It's this access here that is today existing and that helped to feed the cultural zone, block completely all the sport grounds, the school, to the other side, on that side. So are we ready to leave our vehicle here or here? Again, it's not only a personal effort or individual effort. It's a public effort. We need to create, I mean, I saw on the previous presentation, e-cycle pool, transition, I mean, mobility, parking. So all this can be done, and can be done if we are enough on our cycle or on our e-cycle to ask for this change. So that was between the library and the Kalpana. You remember I mentioned the big, large open space which is already paved. My idea is to reclaim the paved area and to create shade, light structure, you know, really to recreate a life, urban life.
So we just began with looking back at the inspiration given by the mother and her sketch. We also thought that it would be interesting to see how the galaxy model or the Auroville plan in general and the directional meanings and what could be the parallels between what symbolism mother gave and this. The concept of Pada Vinyasa, which is a 9x9 grid module as per the Vastu Shastra texts.
The first grid that you saw, that was divided in 9 squares. So these intersections, these becomes the Marmasthanas. And then the center is the Brahmasthana, like also in the last presentation we spoke about the banyan being the center and holding the very potent energy.
So over this exercise we tried to strengthen the industrial zone, which is the north of our plan.
There is this movement of the individual journey, which is kind of anti-clockwise, which is going inward. And then, so we tried to connect the Marmasthanas of the part, the whole, to the symbol of the inner reflection Matrimandir. We took the amphitheater as our collective symbol, and then joining them to the Marmasthanas and other points in the energy grid.
To begin with, I mean, on this side, we have the first line of force building, which also is a part of Darkali forest. The idea of this community food experience and how we name it is like a community food court. This could start becoming something like a eat street, which could become more active in the evenings. Here would be an interesting place to start doing the place where the construction activities like the storerooms for construction, some kind of manufacturing that could start happening. We need to have some places for things like the postal service, common delivery points, delivery services that could be there. Like a cluster of services which is more like the services for the people working in the industrial zone. So things like day laundry, some kind of tea stall, some kind of lounges, things like what master plan document mentions about the activities on the ground for the industrial zone. Things like hostels and all can start already be happening in these areas, because we'll see that would also add to the night presence in the area. Something like a center for arts and crafts training, a youth plaza which very well reflects the idea of the cultural zone and mixing of the industrial zone, which could have markets and vocational trainings, a little bit spillover of the crafts and arts center.
If we look at the Marmasthanas, around these areas, what we would propose is to have more open spaces and not really built spaces.
So this is just a diagram of how we see that some of these activities could have the night presence.
We looked at industrial zone was also this lines of forces which are going to, which are planned to be quite tall towards the center. We started realizing that crown is not just the ground, but it's also the canopy that's planned on top. And then it also took back to this idea of the changing phenomenology of the crown. And we have actually in Vastu Shastras the proportions, and the proportions have different names. So 1:1 and so on. And the highest one is kind of 1:2, which is Adbhutam. And Adbhutam means something that is wonderment.
We are really talking about what was existing around here, what is there right now, and what is yet to come. We say the industrial zone is the driver, and it can help us develop. We do this development very consciously.
Looking at water, food, community, social capital as the core of planning, how we can adopt this to reclaim the water we consume every day. Used water, reclaimed water, decentralized, you putting into crown, and then utilizing that to other things, growing food, recreation, and so forth. Then using that water to grow food around Auroville and bioregion. And I looked at youth center as the starting point within Crown. This is one of the visual view of that street. As an architect, we look at planning and designing through very solving problems or meeting the client's requirement. Sometimes we forget that there is a life in that. So I'm trying to see, it's not, there is no book for bringing life into street, but it's mostly organic, mostly bringing communities together, different age groups together, somehow combining that. So what I'm trying to do here is give that opportunity to create or to happen, to organically, it should somehow evolve. See how some scenarios on Crown, this water being there, and buildings are elevated from the ground where the bottom bit is mostly for public and to thoroughfare. One of the plazas being like this water built environment and gathering spaces.
We don't want to put our buildings far away to avoid the road. In fact, we want to have parts of the built spaces, which are like semi-covered spaces, to speak to the road so that there is an extension of the street onto the spaces beyond. That crown for us is a place where we see our culture unfolding. We had tried before was to take the footprint of the galaxy, and now what we have done is we have interpreted that into different scaled spaces interconnected. The space around the street is kind of punctuated, making it wider at places, making it narrower at places by activities which will be used by us. We reworked on the form and the feature of the youth space, where it is partially on the road and partially away, and they have their own inner space. Complementing that is another space, more public in nature. The built faces have their own character, one of them that allows the movement of public, the other side or the third side which has, expression of silence and privacy, both. We had talked about crown as a bund, and that means that we are not just holding water at the crown and flooding it. The water has been conserved and, as per the experts, in different parts connected through. One of them is crown as a bund, and then of course it's beyond the crown as well. This is without the built areas, the green, blue, and the red. So we are talking about built spaces which are having mixed land use, and of through connections which are shaded connectivity. Very important to use semi-covered spaces for internal mobility. So what kind of porosity are we thinking of? How much of percentage of porosity is required so that the through connectivity is facilitated? The idea of built spaces conversing with the street is facilitated. which are the common spaces which the two plots will have to, put together so that it's a larger common space. The water and soil conservation guidelines that have to come with every plot as well, of what kind of water conservation, where, how much, and so on and so forth. And yes, space for impromptu activities to unfold, that should be not plotted. And here now we have again worked with connecting across. So, at parts the crown road or street, if I may say, is wide. At parts it is narrow, both for a reason, both giving different chances and different opportunities and different environment.
The mobility lane becomes more like a service corridor, and it's like Mother calls it, it's a zone of transport. So the combination of this mobility lane and these building character is for me the beginning of this exercise. So here I have superimposed the cultural zone concept plan on this satellite image, and here you see the crown is crossing over at different points, but the buildings are actually not necessarily laid along the crown. They are sometimes inward looking, and they very much represent this void or zonal concept, and they create these different clusters. So it's not like the urban design differs on both sides. So it's not like creating a row of buildings on both the sides of the crown street. These are the building forms. If you see the scale of these buildings, and this is the scale of Kripa. So it is possible to create big buildings with a lot of space in between without cutting any trees and retaining the language which Roger is talking about. So here I have highlighted only the mobility lane. The spaces in between can be water bodies. They can even be visual water bodies integrated in architecture, and even the greens. And here actually the important point is the input for infrastructure will be as the zones are crossing, probably we will have to bring the building forms much closer to the mobility lane, because otherwise the scale when the buildings are crossing will grow enormous, and we don't want to create pedestrian bridges. So that the scale needs to be retained. So probably the structural forms or structural supports will need to be closer to the mobility lane. Actually, this is, if we forget about the mobility lane, this becomes the right of way, and you can see the right of way becomes something else. It becomes more like a social space between the buildings, and we forget about the road is passing through. And this was actually the program given by Cultural Zone Group, and they write it as a journey of joyful immersion in the mobility through spaces. So this part can be later densified where Kalabhumi stretches. And if you see, the immediate cluster of development can be near Kripa, and we can, even if we do some buildings on both the sides, actually it can create that cluster. Another input of this exercise would be that not just the building palette in the crown needs to be same, but the building palette across the two buildings also need to be similar, so that we actually relate to these clusters. And also the inner facades need to speak to each other. Otherwise, we don't actually read it as one cluster. And if you see the progression of parks through the city, actually we come from the green belt, which is the forest and the farms, and then it starts opening out in the form of more greens. And when it actually intersects the crown, there is a zone of activities. And then you go to the innermost meditative plaza, which is Matru Mandir. This can be created exhibition spaces, so it can be created without, it can be just mounts which are created, no need to have steps to come back to the plan, so it can become something like that. So the mobility, here I have shown only the mobility lane, which is actually in the same nature of the other spaces on two sides, and this can be water, and you can go from future school or cross here with exhibition spaces, and these are these outdoor cinema and the steps on the other side. Purpose of this exercise is this language can be treated in different zones to have varied experiences without losing the essence of the zone and still retaining the language and the galaxy concept. So this is where I have my two crowns.